What you just witnessed might be the most unhinged, the most violent, the most career-ending moment in WWE history, and I need you to understand the gravity of what Cody Rhodes just did, because this isn't wrestling anymore. This crossed every line, shattered every boundary, and destroyed any pretense that what we're watching is just entertainment. Cody Rhodes, the American Nightmare, the man who finished his story, the man who's supposed to be the hero, the babyface champion that WWE has built their entire company around, just tried to murder Drew McIntyre. I'm not being dramatic, I'm not exaggerating for clicks, I'm telling you exactly what happened in that parking lot when Cody Rhodes got behind the wheel of a car and attempted to run down Drew McIntyre like he was playing Grand Theft Auto in real life. And the sickest part, the part that's going to have you arguing in the comments for days, is that some of you are going to defend this. Some of you are going to say Drew deserved it, that he had it coming, that Cody was justified in attempting vehicular homicide because of what Drew has done to him over the past few months. And if that's your take, if you think attempted murder is an appropriate response to a wrestling rivalry, then we need to have a serious conversation about where the line is, about what's acceptable in storytelling, and about whether WWE has completely lost the plot in their desperate attempt to create viral moments and shock value. Because what happened in that parking lot wasn't cool, wasn't badass, wasn't the kind of retribution that makes you cheer for the hero. It was psychotic, it was terrifying, and it was the moment Cody Rhodes stopped being the hero of this story and became something much darker, much more dangerous, and much more interesting than the sanitized corporate champion WWE has been trying to sell us for the past year. Let me set the stage for you, because the context matters, the build-up matters, and understanding how we got to this point is essential to grasping why this moment is either the greatest thing WWE has done in years or the biggest mistake that's going to haunt them for decades. Cody Rhodes and Drew McIntyre have been at each other's throats for months now. This isn't some throwaway feud between two guys who needed something to do. This is personal, this is visceral, this is the kind of hatred that feels real because somewhere along the way it stopped being just a storyline and became something more. Drew has been relentless in his attacks on Cody, targeting not just the man but everything he represents. Drew destroyed Cody's legacy, mocked his family, disrespected his father's memory, and made it his mission to prove that Cody Rhodes is a fraud, that the American dream is dead, and that everything Cody accomplished was built on lies and corporate favoritism. And Cody, for his part, has been trying to take the high road, trying to be the bigger man, trying to prove that he's better than Drew's mind games and provocations. But everyone has a breaking point. Everyone has that moment where the high road becomes impossible to travel, where turning the other cheek stops being noble and starts being weakness, where the only response that makes sense is overwhelming, devastating violence. For Cody Rhodes, that moment came last week when Drew McIntyre crossed the final line, when he did something so heinous, so unforgivable, that it shattered whatever restraint Cody had been clinging to. The details don't even matter at this point because we all know what Drew is capable of, we all know he's been systematically destroying everything Cody cares about, and we all knew that eventually Cody was going to snap. What nobody expected was how catastrophically, how brutally, how absolutely insane that snap would be. The parking lot segment started innocuously enough. Drew McIntyre was shown leaving the arena after a match, walking through the parking lot toward his car, talking trash to the camera like he always does, supremely confident, completely in control, believing he had broken Cody Rhodes and won their war. The camera followed him as he approached his vehicle, and for a moment it seemed like this was just going to be a standard interview segment, Drew cutting a promo about how he's the real champion, how Cody is finished, the usual stuff we've heard 100 times before. But then you heard it. The engine. The revving of an engine that sounded like a predator growling before it attacks. Drew turned around, and the look on his face, that mixture of confusion and dawning horror, that split second where he realized what was about to happen but couldn't quite believe it, that's going to be burned into wrestling history forever. The car came screaming around the corner, tires screeching, headlights blazing, and behind the wheel was Cody Rhodes. Not the polished, suit-wearing champion. Not the corporate poster boy. Not the man who smiles for the cameras and shakes hands with sponsors. This was something primal, something unhinged, something that looked less like a wrestler and more like a man who had finally embraced the darkness that he'd been fighting against his entire career. The car accelerated, aimed directly at Drew McIntyre, and for a heart-stopping moment it looked like we were about to witness an actual murder on live television. Drew, to his credit, moved at the last possible second, diving out of the way as the car crashed into the space where he'd been standing just milliseconds before, smashing into a concrete barrier with a sickening crunch of metal and shattering glass. But Cody wasn't done. That's what makes this so terrifying, so beyond anything we've seen before. He didn't just try once and then come to his senses. He threw the car in reverse, the backup lights illuminating the parking lot in an eerie white glow, and he went for Drew again. Drew was scrambling, trying to get to his feet, trying to run, trying to get away from this maniac who was actively trying to end his life, and Cody chased him with a 2-ton weapon, hunting him through that parking lot like a predator stalking wounded prey. Other wrestlers started pouring out of the arena, officials were screaming, security was running toward the scene, and through it all you could hear the engine revving, hear the tires squealing, hear the absolute chaos of what was unfolding. Drew managed to get behind another vehicle, using it as a shield, and that's when Cody finally stopped. He sat there in the car, engine still running, staring at Drew through the windshield, and the expression on his face was chilling. It wasn't rage anymore. It wasn't the heat of the moment. It was cold calculation, the look of someone who had made peace with what they were willing to do, who had crossed a line and wasn't coming back. Officials surrounded the car, wrestlers were holding Drew back, who was screaming at Cody, threatening retribution, promising violence, and Cody just sat there with his hands on the steering wheel, breathing heavily, looking like a man who had just discovered something terrible about himself. Now here's where this gets complicated, where the storytelling becomes fascinating and problematic at the same time. WWE has spent over a year building Cody Rhodes as their top babyface, their hero, the man who represents everything good about professional wrestling. He's the guy who came back to finish his story, who won the championship his father never could, who carries himself with dignity and respect and professionalism. He's the antithesis of the anti-hero era, the rejection of the Stone Cold Steve Austin anything-goes mentality, the return to a more traditional hero who wins because he's better, not because he's willing to sink lower than his opponents. And in one parking lot segment, all of that went out the window. You cannot attempt to run someone over with a car and still be positioned as the hero of the story. You cannot try to commit murder and then expect the audience to cheer for you as the good guy. It's a fundamental break from everything WWE has been trying to do with Cody's character, and it raises serious questions about where they're going with this. Is this a heel turn? Are we witnessing the beginning of a dark Cody Rhodes era where he embraces violence and brutality and becomes the villain? Or is this WWE's attempt to have their cake and eat it too, to give us an edge to Cody's character while still keeping him as the babyface champion? Because if it's the latter, if they're going to try to justify this and keep Cody as the hero, then they're insulting our intelligence. There is no world, no scenario, no amount of provocation that makes attempted vehicular homicide acceptable behavior for someone we're supposed to root for. Drew McIntyre is a villain, yes. He's done terrible things, yes. He's pushed Cody beyond any reasonable limit, absolutely. But none of that justifies what Cody did. None of that makes it okay. And the fact that WWE might try to present this as justified retribution, as a babyface getting his revenge, is deeply concerning from a storytelling perspective and honestly from a moral perspective. The online reaction has been predictably split, and reading through the comments and the Twitter debates and the Reddit threads has been absolutely fascinating because it reveals so much about what different segments of the wrestling audience want from their entertainment. One group is absolutely loving this, seeing it as the most intense, most must-see moment WWE has produced in years. They're praising WWE for finally giving us something that feels dangerous and unpredictable, for pushing boundaries and creating a moment that people can't stop talking about. They see this as Cody Rhodes finally showing some edge, finally proving that he's not just a corporate puppet but a man with real emotions and real breaking points. They're comparing it to classic Attitude Era moments, to the kind of boundary-pushing content that made WWE a cultural phenomenon in the late 90s. Then there's another group that's absolutely horrified, and honestly, I understand their perspective completely. They're arguing that this goes too far, that there's a difference between wrestling violence and depicting attempted murder, that WWE has a responsibility to not normalize this kind of behavior, especially in an era where we're more aware than ever of the impact media has on society. They're pointing out that wrestling has a significant young audience, and showing your top hero trying to kill someone with a car sends a terrible message about conflict resolution and appropriate responses to being wronged. They're concerned that this is WWE once again prioritizing shock value over meaningful storytelling, going for the viral moment without thinking through the implications of what they're depicting. Both perspectives have merit, and that's what makes this so complicated. Wrestling has always existed in this weird space where it's simultaneously trying to tell realistic, emotionally resonant stories while also being completely divorced from real-world consequences and logic. Stone Cold Steve Austin used to drive vehicles into the arena and attack Mr. McMahon, and we cheered because it was cathartic and entertaining and clearly over the top enough that we understood it was fantasy. But there was something about the way this Cody Rhodes segment was shot, something about the desperation in Drew's face, something about the realistic consequence of the car crash and the chaos that followed, that made it feel less like wrestling fantasy and more like we were watching something genuinely dangerous and disturbing. What's WWE's endgame here? Where does this story go from this point? You can't just move on from attempted murder like it's another chair shot or suplex. There have to be consequences. Real consequences, not wrestling consequences. In any rational world, Cody Rhodes would be arrested. He would be charged with attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and probably a dozen other crimes. He would be stripped of his championship, banned from WWE, facing years in prison. Drew McIntyre would have every right to sue him into oblivion, to press criminal charges, to ensure that Cody never wrestles again. But this is wrestling, and wrestling has always operated under different rules than reality. The question is whether WWE is going to acknowledge any real-world consequences or if they're going to just have these guys fight at the next pay-per-view like this was just another escalation in their rivalry. If they're smart, if they're thinking long-term, they'll use this as a turning point for Cody's character. They'll have him face consequences, they'll have authority figures question whether he should be allowed to compete, they'll have him struggle with what he's become and whether he can come back from crossing this line. That would be interesting storytelling. That would give depth to a character who frankly has been a bit one-dimensional since winning the championship. Cody has been great as champion, don't get me wrong, but he's been safe. He's been predictable. He's been exactly what you'd expect from a top babyface in modern WWE, no rough edges, no moral complexity, just a good guy who does good things and wins matches. This parking lot incident, if handled correctly, could add layers to his character that we've never seen before, could force him to confront the darkness within himself, could make him a more complete and compelling protagonist. But if WWE just moves on, if this becomes just another moment in the highlight reel with no lasting impact on the story or the characters, then it's a wasted opportunity and a really irresponsible piece of content. You can't depict attempted murder and then just forget about it. You can't have your top star try to kill someone and then have them shake hands and move on to the next feud. There has to be a reckoning. There has to be a psychological toll. There has to be an acknowledgement that Cody Rhodes crossed a line that can't be uncrossed, and that has to inform everything about his character going forward. Drew McIntyre's role in all of this is also fascinating because he's simultaneously the victim and the architect of his own destruction. Drew has been pushing Cody for months, systematically breaking him down, attacking everything he holds dear, trying to find that breaking point. And he found it. He succeeded in breaking Cody Rhodes, in pushing him past the point where he could maintain his composure and his morality. But now Drew has to deal with the consequences of what he's unleashed. He wanted to prove that Cody was weak, that underneath the American dream facade was just another flawed, violent man. And he was right. But being right doesn't help you when that flawed, violent man is trying to run you over with a car. Drew created a monster, and now he has to survive that monster, and there's something almost tragic about that. The match that inevitably comes from this, probably at the next premium live event, is going to be absolutely brutal. There's no way these two can have a normal wrestling match after this. It has to be a street fight or a no disqualification match or some kind of stipulation that allows for the level of violence this feud demands. And honestly, I'm not sure how they top the parking lot segment. When you've already depicted attempted murder, where do you go from there? What's the next escalation? How do you have a satisfying conclusion to a feud that's already gone this far? These are the questions WWE's creative team is going to have to answer, and based on their track record, I'm both excited and terrified to see what they come up with. There's also the championship situation to consider. Cody is still the champion, presumably, unless WWE strips him of the title as punishment for his actions. And if he keeps the championship, what does that say about WWE as a company? That attempted murder is fine as long as you're the top guy? That rules don't apply if you're popular enough? These are uncomfortable questions that WWE probably doesn't want to answer but that they've opened themselves up to by doing this storyline. Every decision they make from this point forward is going to be scrutinized through the lens of this moment, and they better have good answers for why their hero is allowed to continue being their hero after trying to kill someone. The wrestling industry as a whole is watching this very carefully because WWE is the standard bearer, they're the biggest company, and what they do influences everyone else. If this storyline is successful, if it draws ratings and creates buzz and makes money, then you can bet every other promotion is going to start pushing their own boundaries, trying to create their own shocking moments that get people talking. But if it backfires, if there's a backlash, if advertisers get uncomfortable or if parents start complaining about the content their kids are watching, then it could have a chilling effect on the entire industry's willingness to take creative risks. Wrestling is always walking this tightrope between being too sanitized and being too extreme, and Cody Rhodes trying to murder Drew McIntyre with a car is definitely on the extreme end of that spectrum. Whether it's the right kind of extreme or the wrong kind of extreme is going to depend entirely on how WWE handles it from here, and on whether audiences embrace it or reject it. Right now, in this moment, all we can do is acknowledge that WWE took a massive creative swing, that they created a moment nobody will forget, and that Cody Rhodes just did something that forever changes how we see his character, for better or worse.